Hi everyone, it's Maria from J'adore le papier. I'm back to do another fashion custom journal flip through. If it looks like a handbag, it is purely accidental. Actually, this fashion journal is Gabrielle Book 2B, and it's currently on reserve right now, but I just wanted to share everything with you. It does come with a couple of pieces of jewelry. This one is actually the center of attention for me right now because it represents the jewelry that Gabrielle did later in her career in 1932, Bijoux de Diamant, and she actually has one that's shaped like a feather. This one is actually more like a leaf or a plume, but it is truly a journal. The reason why it looks like a handbag is because Catherine from French Billet Doux actually found me some Chanel ephemera in France, and this is the bag that I was going to use as the envelope for the back. And so some of my favorite Lacta and specialty papers, and did this, suddenly it just looked like a handbag. So, wool boucle, the little French brooch that I got from Oh La La Camille, the French buttons, and of course there's the back 2-inch spine. So this used to be a French Edith Holden Diary of a Country Girl book. And so let me go ahead and open her up and reveal the inside and then adjust my camera a little bit. And this is actually Becoming Chanel, Gabrielle's closet, just because there's a little more fashion in here and because of the jewelry. But I think really because it is book 2 and potentially the owner already has book 1, I wanted to make it a continuation, moving away from Gabrielle and truly becoming Coco Chanel. Forgot to give you the measurements. With the newly rebuilt spine, it is now just about 7 1/4, just under 7.5 wide by 10 inches tall, and the spine, like I said, is about 2 inches wide, and it does have 5 signatures, so 200 pages, 200 sides to journal on, and it is flanked by this French brooch here. I went on a little bit of a spree on vintage brooches from Oh La La Camille just because she had some great ones that I knew I'd be using in some of my journals. So on the back to the inside, actually an embroidery board that gives you instructions on how to sew your embroidery pieces. I got that from a brown paper parcel. I purchased my own letters and she gave me the instructions so I could learn how to sew it to anything, whether it's book covers or journals. But because of the letter C, of course, Becoming Chanel, I had to include it here. So it's partially sewed down and glued into a pocket, and then I just covered the sewing bit here with some vintage or antique lace that I got from Sam Poole Designs. So thank you, Sam. Inside is a vintage ephemera. So this one I think, is that German? I'm going to have to double check. Or Norwegian. But it's just one of the botanical trading cards that I love to use. A little bit of vintage mail because I love this person's handwriting. And I feel like this might be a letter that Chanel received to encourage her to continue with her career, not only into the 30s, but also post-war. And then these are just some images from Ruby and Pearl's Vintage Ladies. I feel like these are her new clients that she's really working for as she becomes Coco. So you can actually put more in this pocket, but I didn't want to overstuff it. So on the right here, Becoming Chanel. This is actually a photo of a Italian actress or cabaret actress, but I feel like that's who Gabrielle wanted to be originally before she became a fashion icon. And so I put this picture here. I actually got this postcard from Italy. I'll be sure to link all of the sellers below because I love supporting small business. We're all out here just trying to do our art. So this is who she wanted to become. This is some vintage Victorian lace from a dress. I've been cutting up little bits and pieces to put in my journals, and I'm just about out of it. But I feel like she was helping ladies move out of the Victorian era into the Edwardian era. And as she was doing that and letting go of her cabaret dreams, she became Chanel. And so this represents an older photo of her, even though that's not exactly her. It might be. It actually looks very similar to her, sitting very stoic and very classy. And it is an older postcard as well, flanked by a vintage tulle ribbon that I get from Miab, a brown paper parcel, and then some dotted Swiss from Ruby and Pearl XO, and then a button I got from Donna, as well as some vintage French buttons, and a little piece of that cabaret, a beaded piece that I have for Sylvie's fabric or trim that is on the cover of From Gabrielle's Desk, to tie them together. So those just tuck right in there. And I do have this acid-free tissue paper just to kind of protect this antique lace here and some of the buttons from the front cover. So if you notice the inside, I do love to use my specialty papers and Locta. And so this journal is floating, it has a floating spine right there, so the journal lays flat. And I did use the French hand-woven linen that I get from Mia because it's the strongest that I have. But I also lined the actual book itself with this raw silk. So you have not only the wool boucle on the outside, you have the raw silk that wraps the original book, and then you have this hand-woven French linen, so it's very, very strong. And then I layered the end papers with Locta paper on top of the linens and the specialty rice paper here, just because I had the sort of the pattern of a wool tweed. As we flip through, is a little piece of vintage or antique French linen design, and then I covered it with a little bit of this French vintage Grosgrain ribbon, and that's the actual rayon label, the French label that I get from Mia. I get them in spools from her, and a little bit of Chanel ribbon as well from Catherine. And then these are photos of the ladies she's starting to really help, because, you know, starting with the Victorian era, you had these giant hats, actually even earlier than Victorian era, but this is actually an old trading card there. Giant hats, and Gabrielle or Chanel didn't really like that, and so she felt like during the early part of her career, she wanted to move away from these big hats. But she never wants to forget that it was the hats and designing for these ladies that really launched her career. This is a piece of very antique measuring tape that I got, and it's very grungy, but I feel like it represents the early part of her career. Some photos from early 1909, and the big hats again from my Femina magazine that I get from Catherine in France. And I don't like to cut them, so you'll see that I do like to do these fold-outs whenever I use these big magazine pages in these smaller books. Or a town called Vichy, and she actually worked there after she spent time at the or had to leave the orphanage because she aged out. You'll notice I do love my ledger paper as well. So these are all vintage British ledger papers, just like I used in the From Gabrielle's Desk. Really strong, and they can carry a lot of these postcards and photos and fabrics that I add to them. I love this photo. It represents the friends that she had in the early 1900s, maybe like Boy Capel and Etienne Balsan, even though these aren't the very men. But I represent the friends, her sister and her aunt, who really helped her early in her career, because she could have never done this by herself. So that's just printed on my new favorite Khadi paper. Just like in the From Gabrielle's Desk, I did use vintage wallpapers from Ruby and Pearl XO in the center of each page, just to create more gap at the spine, so that as I stuff it with ephemera, it doesn't get the alligator mouth. So again, that's from a book called Book Theme Journal from Jibin Neri. So I'll link that as well, because it's really informative and it works. So you'll see a lot of the vintage wallpaper there. And then this is an early photo of Gabrielle. This is her store in Deauville, backed by some French book pages, I feel like, and a little bit of vintage trim that I'll be placing throughout. To add to your vintage collection of postcards that I love to help tell the story, this is actually a postcard of Marseille, which is a village in the south of France, and it's just west of Nice, getting closer towards Biarritz. So it's moving towards the Spanish border. And that's an unused postcard, and a little bit of a vintage ledger with part of Sam Poole's sewing ephemera kit printed to it, just because I loved a little bit of the aging that she has captured there. But as she moves towards Biarritz, and of course her first store was Deauville, right, the hat store, but then in Biarritz she starts to add actual sportswear. So that's where she introduces her sailor shirt, cotton, and then her jersey knit sportswear. So even though she hasn't quite moved into her couture yet, I feel like these two pieces really represent what she started selling in Biarritz, and truly what became her biggest money maker to date beyond her hats. And so this is an actual photograph outside of her Biarritz store, and some French handwriting on some vintage ledger paper from Catherine, and some more of that beautiful antique or vintage wallpapers from Heather at Ruby and Prolix. So a little bit of a sewing machine, even though primarily Gabrielle Chanel did hand sewing early, especially early in her career, and that's what she learned. She wasn't a sewer, she was a designer. We have a little piece here. Catherine of French Biaudou did find me a lot of authentic vintage fabrics from France. This one is a little bit of a linen, and it even still has the original staple there. So that actually represents a lot of the early sportswear. So you'll see her color palette begin to develop. She does a lot of black and white and blue, navy and white, and a lot of linen colors. So actually these colors together, black, cream, and linen, where you can still see and practically feel some of the dried fountain pen. And it's the softest paper. Let's see, Sharon, and you know, because I used a lot of this in your French designer altered book as well. But this is a vintage or antique piece of French tapestry design. I don't think this one was the William Morris, but it came from an antique French textile book that I found on the public domain. But look at that piece of ink from a fountain pen. I love it. This is a picture of her store in Biarritz as well. So you'll see she's still wearing some of the older designs in her sewing frock and smaller hats that she's designing. I've used this picture before. It's one of my favorites just because they're so happy in this picture. A lot of blank ledger paper. This is French ledger paper. More of the wallpapers. This is the khadi paper, and so it's from India, but I use it for watercolor, fountain pen, ink, sketching, charcoal, you name it, and it's a great paper. Absorbs any type of media really well. As she moves away, not necessarily away from Biarritz, but with the success of it, I just felt like I needed to pay a lot of attention to the details of the customers there. So this is actually a Biarritz postcard, and it is used, and it's going to Paris, and I'm not sure exactly which year it was posted, but yeah, it's just beautiful. Moving on, you'll see a lot of blank pages because I love to give people room to write, but also to decorate, and then maybe even add their own art. And this very vintage, probably nearly antique trading card represents a lot of the new clientele and ladies that Coco Chanel is working with. So you'll notice the feathers. I think she had a couple of designs in the 20s and 30s that used a lot of feather fringing around the face line. So if I had to suspect, this is probably 1915 to middle 1920s. But there's no year, just a lot of patina. And a little bit of the last little bit of vintage or maybe even antique fabric that I have from Heather at Ruby and Prolix. So, and because I did sew in little bits here and there of laces, like these vintage pieces from Sam Poole. Instead of using staples, sometimes I'll use thread to actually thread them into the pages, and I usually like to back them with a little bit of fabric, just to keep them from moving around. She's moving the ladies away from. Oh, and then this dress here, it might be hard to see, but it has the most delicate lace design, and it's reminiscent of some of the Dior dresses, but I just love, even with the brooch on the cover, just because I did give it a pretty hefty gap between the floating spine and the hardcover book itself. This is a photo layout collage from Heather Ruby and Pearl Exo's Vintage Ladies. I just love that everyone's moving into the shorter haircuts, and she really is designing for the very, very wealthy clientele, no matter what age. So they're moving away from the big hats and the big heavy dresses and into the finer, lighter dresses of the Edwardian era. Some of the Vogue covers pages from the last altered book that I just used. And then some more of the vintage or nearly antique European botanical trading tea cards. As we're moving into the second chapter, or the second, why do I always forget what these are called? Signature, where you'll see this altered paper clip. So the first chapter or the first signature is really a brief revisit of her history and how she became Chanel, and the fabrics that really propelled her into her next career. But the second signature is then flanked with this raw silk flowerette or flower. It was meant to be a camellia, but I just had a bunch of scraps laying out from another journal that I had just worked on. Back of the paper and a paper clip. And this chapter is really about, moves away from her past, but then moves into the 20s and her making of her different perfumes. So starting in 1921 with number 5. So here's some more vintage French magazine pages, a page from the Edith Holden, the original Edith Holden that I've altered. This book, New York to Paris, is just over 3,600 miles. And then 1920, she begins, because she starts receiving a lot of really fine jewelry from both Etienne and Boy Capel. I feel like this chapter really is about not only her perfumes, but her jewelries. It's my all-time favorite photo of Coco Chanel from 1920. And this is a little bit of a blue ledger paper from a British seed ledger. And my first design is actually a lace top, both short sleeve and 3/4 length, with a black jersey knit wrap skirt. And it's probably really hard to tell. Actually, I have it just pinned to the page here, but if you lift it up, right here is a little camellia rosette to tie her skirt, and then 3 little camellias to button her top. Just I feel like, again, it's her main palette, black, white, and cream. So there's the back side. This one is probably 1940 magazine, but I just love the black and white silhouette next to the skirt. Some images from the 40s, and again, I just like to leave them. You can fold out all the pages so you can see all the designs. And then a vintage or antique French page. You'll see a lot of journaling room and a lot of art or sketching room or fountain pen writing. A big piece of antique wallpaper from Heather again. This is one of my favorites. These are your own fabric bits here. You'll notice I didn't use a lot of antique vintage trims just because I didn't want to get this too alligator mouth. Antique French lawyer papers from 1922 in blue. I love the blue and brown, and so you'll notice it kind of blends with Heather's fabric with the khaki, the blues, and the pinks. Kick of pressing a lot of flowers, especially with everything in bloom lately. But these are little chamomiles, and this little specimen card is from Peg and All, just one of their freebies that they have. A vintage postcard from, let's see, where is this? Oh, Villefranche, which is just northwest of Nice. Everything for me is revolving around Nice, France, my favorite spot that I call home when I do go to the south of France, and then I just travel from there. But it is a used postcard, and I think I got this from Mina over at, I'll actually flash her shop online. She said she's probably going to have an Instagram account finally in June, so we can really highlight her shop as well. But that was just a little thank you gift from her. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, when they were newly married. On the inside is an authentic Chanel advertisement. And this one is number 5 in the slightly bigger, oh, it's now the Eau de Toilette, slightly bigger bottle. It's easy so that I can use them in the journals. Some vintage prints of older hats. The black and white just really represents Gabrielle's color. And it's just printed to some newsprint paper. Look at that brown. I just love how it looks on this brown art paper here, or cardstock paper, and the vintage patina of this ad. An old photograph against the blue and brown here. Again, that's that legal 1922 French document. These ladies in their hats and their furs. And it is a paper, the other paper that I used to love to use, and I still do. Anyway, it's just one of these vintage ledger with watercolor printed on there, just because I love the browns and the blues against these browns and blues. Magazine page and fashions. And then here is the first big art piece other than the fashions that I make. Because this is technically in the 20s and 30s, and she's working on her perfumes, Chanel number 5, number 22 in 1922. This is actually a generic. I didn't want to put any Chanel ribbon here to say, but maybe it's my own scent. So I love the lace-looking bottles that our grandmothers used to have. So this is actually a vintage piece of lace. I don't remember if I got this one from Donna Morgan. Used one of these vintage botanical trading cards or tea cards that I have in the front of the journal. So there's that. Tucks right in, and it could very well be the underlying scent of this perfume. But there you go. So it also mimics the label. One of my pressed carnations, just because I loved how it smelled, and it just pressed nicely. It's a nice smooth feeling to it. And then I used a little piece of Heather from Ruby and Pearl XO's last little piece of that vintage linen fabric with the blue flowers and the pink flowers that you saw earlier in the journal, to make the cap with a lace trim. But I did sign the back, and I just sewed around the edges. So that's on khadi paper. So that's your first piece of art other than the fashion designs. Vintage or antique menu, lunch menu in green. It's French. It's 1925. And I topped it with the antique lace bits from the French estate sale. So it's really patina. Second piece of art related to the Perfumes. Again, because I think 3 or 4 years in a row, maybe even more, Chanel after 1921 came out with a new scent every year. This is actually a vintage French fabric from the Bon Marché that Catherine found me in a beautiful green. And I tried to come up with the right watercolor to kind of mimic it, but I didn't get it exact. But I just loved how the palette came out, and so I just added some of my dried pressed flowers in yellow. So this one's really pretty right there. Stitched around the back with a couple of vintage or old European stamps on the back, so you can journal, or you could do your own watercolor or sketching on the back. These are my new favorite. These tea trading cards from the Netherlands, from Gabrielle's desk, the other measuring tape. So she has some really cool vintage pieces. Okay, I think this is your third art piece from me. I had a day where it was sunny outside, and I went to do some watercoloring by the lake. And these were the different reds that I wanted to. I was trying to find a pink to create a pink wool boucle dress, just like the Chanel design that was in the other journal. But it came out more red. I couldn't control my water very well outside. I think the glare from the sun blinded me. But I also had this perfectly blue-red fabric swatch. Again, it's a vintage French one from the Bon Marché that Catherine found. And I thought it would make the perfect red lipstick, which is, of course, signature color and design, first color from Chanel's line, a makeup line in 1924. And you'll see the backside of that linen sample swatch. But I thought that kind of came out really cool, and it's just backed on this cotton rag Indian paper, French storytelling, romantic story from one of the Femina magazines, flanked by, I think I stapled this on, another one of the vintage Galeries Lafayette fabrics from French billet doux. So it still has the original pin, so be careful of that pin there, it might be a little bit rusty. But I just thought it flanked this black fabric really well. And we are now into the third signature, so makeup, later 1920s. A lot more ledger for you to write in and sketch in. And then because we're moving towards the 30s, a few of these vintage sewing pages from Heather at Ruby and Pearl XO. She had them in my journal, and I asked her for them because of the sewing tips on how to make fringe. And this one, actually, I'm going to try to do this where I'm going to actually make some flowers, fabric flowers, for a couple of upcoming journals. So it has instructions there, and then instructions for creating the chevron fringes at the bottom of your 1930 flapper dresses. And of course, in the 1930s, the pajama pants were really just everywhere throughout Europe. So that's one of my new favorite pajama pant photos from the 20s and 30s. And then one of my fashions, of course, I have to do using ribbon, the wide leg pajama pant with a striped bandeau to sort of be an homage to her original striped sailor shirts. That photo together and that little design. And this is just pinned on, so you could actually move it about, twister. Love the blues, sort of the reds, just to kind of be a nice contrast. And of course, the patina of the original fountain pen ink pants. They are now more linen with a linen top. So I backed it with an open weave linen, or no, this is actually the raw silk, just because I feel like maybe the top was more of a raw silk and then the pant was a linen. Vintage or antique French document, 1919. The juxtaposition of the 30s and 40s, how she progressed in her fashions and who was influencing around that time. Oh, and another beach pajama with more of a halter top. I thought, oh, I sketched this, yeah. Okay, so I attempted to sketch it. So it's backed by one of these hand-woven French linens in an off-white or white that I get from Miab at a brown paper parcel, because I feel like that's probably what this fabric is. It's probably a lighter weight version of this linen. Myself on a handmade piece of paper, has a little bit of a blue tint to it. I think this one's 2-piece. Her version might be an actual 1-piece. And I just like a little bit of the blue wallpaper with a blue handmade paper there. And some of this blue seed ledger paper from the UK wallpapers to help with some of your design or journaling. Okay, so we are now in the 4th. We're about to enter the 4th signature, and I flanked it with a little bit of this sari beaded trim that kind of looks like jewelry to me. I got this from Heather at Ruby and Pearl XO as well. So in this 4th signature, it's about the jewelry. So this is a French actress. She's actually a cabaret actress or a stage starlet. And it's a vintage postcard. And it's unused, but I backed it with that vintage scrapbook cutouts that I get from Mina in Nice. So that's that famous Nice fake. But look at that bracelet. You know, I like my bracelets, but look at that bracelet. I'm just going to pause here for a second. And then her brooch, and then her pearls, And then look at her hat. Today we call that bedazzled, but back then I think that's just dazzling. And again, because this is the signature for jewelry, this piece, Catherine, I hope you can find me one day so I can actually wear it, is wearable. It's vintage French. And is just so beautiful against that black velvet. And it looks like something she would wear. But it comes in this little shoe box. Teeny tiny vintage shoe box. I think this right here makes the journal. Watches, Omega from Switzerland. And of course, Gabrielle spent a few years in Switzerland before she came back to Paris in the 1950s. So some more vintage ledger and magazine pages for you to sketch or design in. And then, let's see, these pages I have, because I haven't added any art to them, the wallpaper is a little stiff, so you'll want to go through and just kind of coax it into laying open for you. But this is a postcard of Paris. And as many of you know, Coco Chanel in the 40s actually stayed or lived in the Ritz, even though she had her main Rue Cambon apartment above 31. She lived in the Ritz hotel at Place Vendôme. So that was part of her view. If this is the hotel, I think. So she looks out over her balcony. And it's unused, so it's still in the plastic there. Another vintage postcard of Monte Carlo. So she spent a lot of time there, not only at the casino, but just going to the evening shows, maybe a ballet or two. But this is vintage. I thought it was 1910-ish, but I just love these unused postcards. Really pretty. And it just really represents the lifestyle she is now fully living. Some Chinese design to represent the either chinoiserie or the carved coromandels that she loves to collect, and that's from a Femina magazine. So Asian art really was a heavy influence and highly sought after in Paris. I don't remember which one he is. He almost looks like Prince Rainier from Monaco, but I don't think that is. I'll have to see if it says on the back of the magazine somewhere. Khadi paper for your sketching, vintage French paper. Just probably a legal document from 1917. Some sketch paper and antique wallpapers from Ruby and Pearl. This one I kind of left open so you could kind of use it as a tuck. Like that. The lace dress that I feel like she would probably use in Monaco or around her royal friends. Evening out, very floral lace. This is actually the vintage or antique lace that I got from Sam Pool. I removed the belt because I didn't want it to look too casual, and I love just the stitching of that. And then I did give her an embroidered flower, which is supposed to be the camellia. And because in 1932, and this is the jewelry signature collection, as part of the Bijoux de Diamant, and if not 1932, then you can put them in the little tucks here and there, or just paper put this somewhere, or pin it, or staple. Over 200 pages again, because it's 5 signatures. This is now the 6th signature, moving into the 50s, and her comeback to Paris after her time in Switzerland. I think this one I don't have the Switzerland postcard, just because it was hard to find postcards of Lausanne where she stayed. But this chapter here has more of her modern fleece, or not fleece, tweed, and wool boucle designs, and more use of pearls. And this was a attempted sketch of one of her pink wool boucle dresses. That was an earlier sketch, but I wanted to do it in blue. I still don't know how to paint wool boucle or tweeds. I'm still learning. So I was trying to play with the watercolors just to see if I could get the gradation right of wool or tweed at least, and then I'm gonna keep practicing. Last one. Oh, here's the dress. This is what I was trying to attempt in blue. It's the Chanel wool boucle with pink, and then one of these vintage or antique floral tea cards here in her career, 50s and 60s. So that is just to always remember during the war. Some of the soldiers. Oh, I did actually add a postcard of Lausanne, which is where she stayed in Switzerland. Let's hope that this actually focuses there. Solo-san. That's pretty cool. 1908. A little bit of the William Morris sketch on vintage ledger, British ledger, and some wallpaper. That's from a Femina magazine. You can read the story. It does fold out. Later designs, crochet designs. It's actually pretty. And then one of her later more iconic black wool boucle or wool and tweed suits. Stories. Oh, and this one is a Paris street, early 1900s, but I just love the scene of that. It's along the river. Khadi paper for your watercolor and sketching. And a little bit more of the wool and ribbon trim. That's very representative of some of the wool of the ribbon trims that she likes to add to her wool jackets and skirts. Just floating as a bookmark. You can use it for your own layouts, your own sketches. And then one more piece of wool with ribbon. So these back pages really are stiff, so you'll just want to go through and either use one of your clips in place. Here's one more. Wool with ribbon trim, so you could likely see that on the inside of her jackets or along the rims of her sleeves. Well, actually, you could probably use that as a bracelet too for papers, especially with the blues. This navy is awesome. And then here's that French bag, authentic Chanel gift bag that I got from Catherine, French billet doux. I was going to put all of the fabrics in here for you and some of the fashions so that if this got too thick, you can move it into this floating pocket. And that's why I had it in the back here, and you can see some of the specialty paper that she would use. But I love that this whole camellia is here, so it is a little thick. And that's why the journal itself gets a little fat, and that's why I just kind of had it poking out the back. I really like how that kind of turned out. So there's the back of your journal. It's a little bit, teeny tiny bit of an alligator mouth, but not too much, but mostly because of this bag in the back. So just lift it a little bit. Pull her out just a little bit so that the little flower sticks out, and then there you go, kind of closes. Then it kind of looks like a cool little handbag, including it is a spyglass. It does actually work to help focus in because there's a lot of small writing and small text, so you can see how it zooms in. And I have that wrapped. I didn't have a necklace chain, but I put it on a longer ribbon for you, so you can read some of the French stories. And then this floating vintage lace cocktail dress that I made from Sam Poole's gift, a little happy meal to me. And enjoy this brooch. You can wear it, and it does come off. It is vintage or nearly antique, so just twist the little bottom, pull it out, and then you can unlatch it from the fabric. It's almost like what's in Gabrielle's handbag, but truly this is becoming Chanel. So I hope you enjoy the flip through, and I will see you next time. Thank you.